Welcome back, everyone, to Pontos Fathom Press. This is episode 58 of our Pontos Fathom Podcast, and we're in part 2 of our Kathu Journals out of Lovecraft's Providence. We're making our way through the volume. We're starting out with the first book, Genealogy of Cthulhu. Actually, we have that edition of the Genealogy of Cthulhu as paperback, just part 1 of this. But you can see Kathu Journals out of Lovecraft's Providence collects 2 trilogies, August Moldenhauer's Kathu Journals and Giuseppe Balsamo's Disclosure from the Necronomicon Fragment. That's Genealogy of Cthulhu, Psychoanalysis of Rilya, Archaeology of Yog-Sothoth, and then Necromancy of Nyarlathotep, Hermeticism of Hastur, and Alchemy of Azathoth. So we'll be weaving in a number of things this episode. Some of which we're trying to continue on our astrological inclusion, some topics on Pluto. We've also got some UFO-like topics in this one. I've got Jacques Ville's Invisible College here. We will reference a bit of the Corpus Hermeticum, the Poimandres of Hermes Trismegistus. We also will read a bit from Daniel Harms and John Wisdom Gaunce's Necronomicon Files, which is a great collection of debunking Necronomicons. I've got The Essential Solitude on the table, Letters of HP Lovecraft to August Derleth, and for good measure, Aleister Crowley's Book of Magic. So let's jump right into it. I think last time when we left off, we were talking about the Heraclitus and stepping into the river twice. So now we're moving into the section called the Parting of the Waters. And this section kind of leads us into a number of areas. So I'll kind of give you guys a preview of where we're going. It starts out with the Parting of the Waters, obviously, is from Genesis. But then we get to the Poimandres, which is a different kind of Genesis. This is the Gnostic Genesis. And then there's a kind of a call out to Leviathan and Cthulhu that we'll touch on. And that leads us into floods. The floods which not only of Noah fame, but perhaps the sinking of Rilya and the sinking of Atlantis. Right, we'll get into that space. And then we bookend it with the Lake of Fire from Revelation. So now we're at the opposite end of the world with the Lake of Fire. The second way the world would be destroyed. An unringing of a bell. The Gnostic Big Bang. And this is where I kind of wanted to call in the UFO file a bit. There's this idea of the fall of Lucifer. And that sort of has the sense of a UFO type topic. So we'll get into that. And then the alien in the fall of Lucifer. We've also got the Cult of the Black Cube book on the table. So we'll take a look at some of that. Council of Nicaea. Let's see how far we can get. So we're going to start out in this space. So let's jump right into it. So first off, I wanted to start us with a quick quote from Dane Rudar's Astrological Timing, again talking about Pluto as the underworld, planet of the underworld, and also the idea though of the trans-saturnian planets, right? So the idea is, regardless of such a possibility, the fact is that we are dealing now with 3 planets beyond Saturn, which indeed should be regarded as a unit, as a trinity, for no other reason than the lengths of their periods of revolution around the sun are related in a most unusual manner. The period of Neptune is twice, and that of Pluto 3 times the length of the period of Uranus. So the 1-2-3 relation between the time cycles of successive planets is unique in our solar system, and in any fact, it is signified out of a given significance, the gestalt, therefore in any system of symbolism. So I think this is things that, when we talk about occulted things, or things that are disocculted, right? We see this at work in these trans-saturnian planets, right? And this is where, we've brought up a number of times Steiner's caution in using the trans-Neptunian, and our solution of that is that Liz Green approach as a psychological approach. Let's kind of take it with that. But here it says, now in the trans-Saturnian planets have entered the conscious mind of humanity, the radical crisis of consciousness to which the modern man is subjected, as his most fundamental biopsychic allegiances are being dissolved into meaninglessness, have taken the place in a greater part of once was occulted. Modern life itself is the tester, because this life challenges us to make decisions that only a few selected and trained individuals could make in the past. So here we have this sort of positive aspect of the trans-Neptunian and Plutonian. And I think that this is kind of like where we would want to start out with going into this idea of parting of the waters. So it says, the author of the Kathu Journals presents what is the second quote. It says, at the beginning, no matter where you turn, people have tied the beginnings back to water. Doesn't the book of Genesis in the Bible start soon enough into the subject of the waters? The manuscript author evokes the parting of the waters, and the reader is pulled into the maelstrom not of water imagery, but also of that of Hesiodic primordial chaos, the obscure philosophies of Heraclitus, and Lovecraftian imagery of Cthulhu dreaming beneath the ocean. All right, this is where the Leviathan comes in, right? And the earth was without form, and the void and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved up the face of the waters, right? And this is also kind of has that kind of black cube Saturn view to it, right? So this is the darkness and the deep is before the sun, right? There's no sun right now at this time. So this is, you think of our diurnal cycle of the earth, where we have daylight and night, and this is sort of like this chaos of darkness, right? But also it's leading us to the idea of what lurks there, and again, it's the old Luke Skywalker in the Empire Strikes Back, where he goes into the cave and Yoda says, "Don't bring a weapon. You only bring in there what you bring." I think a lot of what we see in that reflection of the abyss is oneself, right? And I think this is where we're going to start getting into that space. So we get to section Leviathan and Cthulhu. Just a short note here. The manuscript author says Leviathan, but is he really saying Cthulhu? We are told in the Bible that God separated the land from the waters. A note mentions anthroposophist Rudolf Steiner's assertion that only Saint Michael can redeem Satan, but with a gesture, God parts the waters from where Leviathan gives rise. We are asked to consider the political nature of Leviathan. In fact, the force to be dealt with is in fact hostile to mankind beyond humanity's ability to defend it. And the satanic nature of this Leviathan becomes more hostile when viewed as an alien. And this is the reference to Cthulhu, right? So and we'll get into some of those alien references later in this episode. So let's keep going. It says actually, maybe this is a good point. This is a good place to pause for a moment, because I think if you check in Crowley, something about posture I read, asana. I think this might be interesting, because here we are going into the biblical nature of things, right? It says the history of Christianity. This is from preliminary remarks about mysticism from his book. This is the editor's introduction. We are in the editor's introduction. This is book 4, Mysticism, part 1. Right? Book 4. Interestingly enough, too, in the Kathu Journals, I just wanted to call this out. Let's just put this bookmark back for 1 second. Actually, in the Kathu Journals, there are illustrations, and I just wanted to point this illustration out. I don't know if you can see this, but this is a sleeping image with the 4 on the forehead. Right? An odd alien type 4, right? I'm not sure why, but we'll just call that out there. So let's go into the history of Christianity. Shows precisely the same remarkable fact. Christ brought up the fables of the Old Testament and so compelled to ascribe the experiences to Jehovah. Though the gentle spirit had nothing in common with the monster who was always commanding, let's call it biblical horrors, whose rights were then and still are celebrated by humans. Similarly, the visions of Joan of Arc were entirely Christian, but she, like all the others we have mentioned, found somewhere the force to do great things. Of course, it may be said there's a fallacy in the argument. It may be true that these great people saw God, but do not follow everyone who sees God will do great things. True enough, the majority of people who claim to have seen God, who no doubt did see God just as much as those who have quoted but did nothing else. Perhaps their silence is not a sign of their weakness but of their strength. Perhaps these great men are the failures of humanity. Perhaps it would be better to say nothing. Perhaps only an unbalanced mind would wish to alter anything or believe in the possibility of altering anything. And there are those who think existence, even in heaven, intolerable as long as one single being who does not share that joy. And there are some who may wish to travel back from the very threshold of the bridal chamber to assist the belated guests. And such at least was the attitude which Buddha adopted, nor shall he be alone. To sum up, we assert a secret source of energy which explains the phenomenon of genius, the union of God, samadhi. We do not believe in any supernatural explanations, but insist that this source may be reached following the definite rules. And I want to call it back to this thing about yoga. He talks about asana. Asana means posture, right? But as with all words which have caused debate, its exact meaning has altered and is used in different distinct ways by various authors. The great authority on yoga, Patanjali, says asana is that which is firm and pleasant. Posture is that which is steady and easy. Any posture which is steady and easy is an asana, and there is no other rule. Any posture will do. In this sense, this is true. So it's sort of taking a posture, right? Taking the posture of asana, like this yogic concept, but also this return back to the sources, right? We go back to the sources. And I think this is what's happening here in this. And when we go into the Gnostic poimandres, well, most Christians and even non-Christians are familiar with many aspects and stories of the biblical Genesis. It's less popular to know Gnosticism. For the Gnostics had their own set of origins and creation stories. One such Gnostic text, the Poimandres, was introduced and quoted in the Kathu Journals. The manuscript author introduces the Gnostic text as follows. Perhaps another beginning, less famous but telling, would come in the form of the origins described by Hermes Trismegistus in the Hermetica text called the Poimandres. One must take note of the way in which the manuscript introduces Poimandres, for it continues his evocation of the theme of the obscure, as if to welcome the reader from the nescience of not knowing about the text. As the Kathu Journals offers a quotation of the actual text, we have something akin to being transformed into the novice of some ancient sect, as if participating in some Gnostic mass. Once I had begun to think about the things that are, and my thoughts had soared high aloft, while my bodily senses had been put under restraint by sleep. Yet no such sleep as that of men weighed down, but bodily weariness. The thought that came to me of a being of vast and boundless magnitude, who called me by name and said to me, "What do you wish to hear and see, and to learn and come to know by thought?" So unlike the biblical Genesis, which is sort of like a Bronze Age creation tale, this Poimandres is almost an alchemical type of transformation. So the idea is it's a dreamer reaching higher planes. The Poimandres text goes on to tell what happens if the spirit descends down to earth, right? So So we do see this fall of spirit down to earth in the Primordials, which we don't get to until, like, say, the book of John, because the Logos falls down to earth, right? And I behold a boundless view, always changing into light, and a mild and joyous light, and I marveled when I saw it. And in a little while there had come to be a part of the downward trending darkness, terrible and grim, and thereafter I saw the darkness changing into a watery substance. So now we have a different kind of parting of the waters, right? So the Kathu Journals is taking us to a different kind of parting of waters. What does the parting of waters in Genesis mean? Well, in the Gnostic sense, it means when Logos descends, the light comes into the darkness, and then the darkness is able to now become watery, right? So the densification of the descent of spirit gives it substance. I don't know, something like this. But for the Gnostics, there's no need for a flood fable. The very waters themselves and the corrupt versions of the waters, that is the earth, were fallen from grace. Because then in the Poimandres it continues that spirit densifies into water, and then water densifies into earth. And then the biblical kind of Bronze Age version that we get out of this is like, God separated the lands from the waters, right? That's Logos. So you can see it's the same story. The Logos comes down. So the Kathu Journals is pointing out this to us, is pointing out this difference of traditions, and yet we can find that same echo. Now we get right into floods, though. The floods of New Orleans in 1907 and 2005. Many have said God's turning his back on the flood, right? So that we have that Noah in the flood, right? The idea of the flood submerging sort of a God's wrath, sort of that Crowley had pointed out, right? The gentle soul that is Jesus versus the demiurge that it's like a Yahweh, and yet here we have this concept of the flood, which then gets shorthanded to a submerged city like Atlantis by the manuscript author, or Cthulhu's Rillia, right? So the idea is the place where memory is erased by the waters, right? And I think there's probably a Gnostic connection there too, because once the matter becomes water, forgetting is invented as well, right? Because the water does remember, but it remembers in a crystalline way, not in a conscious way. That's where the unconscious metaphors of water as the unconscious, right? Freud's famous equating of dreams or the unconscious to like the river Acheron, forgetting or something like this, right? Okay, so then we talk about Noah and Hobbes. Again, we're back to Leviathan again, which I think is going to be a shorthand for many things here. Like this Leviathan, biblical Leviathan, that takes us to Satan, it takes us to Cthulhu, but it also takes us to realpolitik, right? Like the Leviathan of the systems of power, let's call it. A note to explore the manuscript's author linking a biblical Leviathan to Lovecraft's Cthulhu in a primordial and ontological sense. You have to mention the political implications of Leviathan in the Kathu Journals. What is interesting to note is a political statement of a kind is the absence of Leviathan from the Ark of Noah in the first flood. After Noah was 500 years, he became father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and afterwards were the sons of God, went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They're the heroes of old, men of renown. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and fell full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become and how the people on earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all of the people, for the earth is filled with violence, and I am surely going to destroy them both on the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood and make room for it and coat it with pitch inside out. And I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, and you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. It is in this way that we are able to bring Noah and Hobbes together in the discussion, the necessity of Leviathan as both a force of nature and a realpolitik. In Hobbes' Leviathan, he discusses the forces at work over the quote-unquote children of darkness, as well as the sovereign powers, divine and human, And I may be talking about Scripture mentions other powers, namely that of the ruler of the darkness of this world, the kingdom of Satan, the reign of Beelzebub over demons, his rule over phantasms that appear in the air. It is because that's what demons are that Satan is called the prince of the power of the air. And those who are under his dominion are called the children of darkness, in contrast to the faithful, who are called the children of light. So now we're seeing this play here on light and darkness. But again, if we ground this back to, Rudyard's, let's call it a psychological reading of the outer planets, and also if you think of, I just watched a great Robert Sefer video on Saturn and the tradition of Saturn as the black sun, right? So now you can see a black sun and a light sun, right? It's not to call them evil, because evil, as Crowley says, is just the ignorance of God, right? So if you have an ignorance of God, that's evil, right? So ignorance is the evil. And I think that the kinds of, look, the diurnal cycle has two different phases, right? Plants grow at night, right? And then the light is where they get their nutrition and and they get their energy to grow later, right? So you think of it this way. So when Noah comes the word of God, followed by the man of God, for which man becomes a subjugation to Leviathan, both in deferring his will to the greater force, be it flood or government. So the kingdom of darkness as presented, so now we're back to the Kathu Journal, is presented in these places is nothing but a conspiracy of deceivers who want to get dominion over men in the present world, and to that end try by dark and erroneous doctrines to extinguish them from the light of nature and making them unfit for the kingdom of God and men. Men who were born blind have no idea at all of the light that the rest of us see through the bodily eye. More generally, no one conceives in his imagination any greater light than he has ever perceived through his outer senses. That's why our only way of acknowledging our own darkness is by reasoning from the unforeseen mischances that befall us along the way, such stumbling at every little hardship someone suffers in his own fortune and every little success that he sees others have, such a variety of ways of running the race towards happiness. We are therefore still in the dark. So the idea here is the dark is teaching also, right? So this is where we learn through experience, right? But now let's flip it now with the manuscript author is taking us now to the Alpha and the Omega and the foretelling of the end of the world by fire. But revelations tell that God will end the world by fire, and by inference, not by the punishment of God, but perhaps by the sign of things to come from some other adversary, some lurker from the deep rising up to take back what had been on loan, like a soul sold whose time for collection has come up. This is from Kathu Journals, Book 1, page 4. So the reference to the lake of fire from the book of Revelations here, but the quotation is not given by the manuscript author for his direction to the reader into the dark abyss of the deep, to the bottom of the Dead Sea, called Pontos by the Greeks, given the fact that the manuscript author has embroiled us in the primordial time of origins. So now God created the stars and the Leviathan of the deep, and this was meant to keep us safe from what was the Leviathan, what was the deep, and what were the stars. So the idea is by pushing those things out, by submerging them, by pushing the stars further away, right, by making the darkness hide things, it was meant to keep us safe. And this is where we get to this unringing of the bell concept. So, and when we say the unringing of the bell, I just had the idea of the bell UFO, right? So the unringing of the bells. In many ways, Lovecraft's city really would teach me the whole of human culture and already steeped into the streams eons ago. And now that things have been set in motion, there is no way to unring the bell, for the sounding had already rippled out. So now we have this idea of a bell rings, and the cosmos unfolds across space and time from its present origins at the birth of the universe, where the laws of physics would seem somewhat alien were we to observe them. Right? And then we see this from the James Webb Telescope right now. There's lots of this kind of strange physics that they're attributing to the origins of time, and we're learning more and more every day about what the Big Bang may or may not have been. So the image of a bell being rung is one that we can use to illustrate a concept of pure vibration. And I also think about a temple bell being rung. I think about when you climb a rope in a rope climbing race, there's a bell at the top to ring, ding, right? You ring the bell. So the idea of the bell being rung, once the bell's rung, the sound waves outward. And the intangibility of the sound waves echoing out from the ball, heard by all, but their origins of the epicenter of a kinetic impact, kinetic violence. And in the ends of a long drawn-out oscillation, even fainter as the sound wave reaches out in all directions for the horizon. Well, the Big Bang is sort of like the big bell, right? And this is getting called out. Yet the manuscript author would have us attempt to go against reason, against the physics of this ringing, against the very logos created by the rules of causality, and have us imagine the unringing of the bell. The bell unrung has its imagery concepts touched by the Gnostics, as well as notions that challenge our current understanding of time, physics, and reason, which again bridge the real-world problem of the crisis of European sciences to the potentiality of greater knowledge, perhaps as evidenced by the alien visitor touched upon by Lovecraft. The bell unrung as a metaphor. So the alien visitor being Cthulhu, right? Cthulhu comes from the stars and he lands, and I think that the manuscript authors will equate this also to the alien landing, to the fall of Lucifer, which is interesting. So here we have this Gnostic Big Bang, like the concentric circles of sound ringing out from some ancient ringing bell. We can see parallels with the science called the Big Bang. Was it the sounding of 7 trumpets, the shock waves of Lucifer impacting the earth at a hellmouth? The shock waves of, you think of the fallen angel, and then this, or was it the arrival of some alien craft rippling the surface of the oceans, right? Think of the beginning of, The Thing, right? The film The Thing, and you see, millions of years ago, a spacecraft enters Earth's orbit and gets frozen beneath the ice in Antarctica, right? Is this the fall of Lucifer? Who knows? Yeah, and I think maybe this is a time to, just quickly call out Jacques Vallée's Invisible College here. And if we check this out, there's just a section here that I thought was interesting about, in spite of much popular interest in the mysterious monuments of South America that Eric von Daniken has tried to link with space visitors, it is in the Middle East that we find the most relevant indications of a cultural change similar to that one that we are undergoing. Now, this is very interesting because later on in the Kathu Journals, we will get into the Lovecraftian text, the Rillian dialect that gets translated in this. But I wanted to call this Phoenician amulets section out in Jacques Vallée's Invisible College, what a group of scientists have discovered about UFO influence on the human race. And it goes into, history books tell us the Phoenician civilization was established in a time much anterior to Hebrew migrations, Semitic tribes in the Middle East. The language of the Phoenicians was close to Hebrew. And so this is the origins of our alphabet, right? The alphabet comes from Phoenicia, like we all learned in grade school, right? And if you looked at this, it says some of the artifacts that are called out by E.A. Wallace Budge. I always think of E.A. Wallace Budge from the movie Stargate, when they say that his Egyptian translations were all wrong. I thought that was great. So all 5 cylinder seals depict a winged disc. So a winged disc coming down, right? Figures which are referred to in the literature as divine beings are seen emerging from these discs in 4 cases. So here are some of those drawings. Figure 1, a cylinder seal, shows a hero holding in his hand the foreleg of a winged beast, a chimera of some sort, a Ahura Mazda or some Assyrian god. Figure B shows, again, another winged creature, a winged disc. Again, a winged disc. Figure C, two large winged figures, interpreted as priests wearing winged garments, frame a large disc with extending legs, the landing gear, and lightning or thunderbolts around it. And the inscription reads, YRPAL, the son of HRDD. Yerpal, son of Hadad, who knows what it is. And then finally we see another sphinx-like goat, and a sphinx, and a sacred tree with the winged disc rising up. And then finally we see these small dwarfish figures below the winged disc. Right, so here we see what Jung would call chthonic, right? And we get from chthonic, we get to Cthulhu. And one more thing about, if we assume that the Phoenicians were thus transmitting recent or ancient knowledge of the details of UFO landings, why should such knowledge be preserved in seals rather than other types of inscriptions? Of all the important words to be referenced as YRPAL, son of HRDD, who was probably the owner of a glass-blowing shop somewhere in Sidon, or perhaps the captain of a sailing ship from the harbor of Tyre. On the other hand, why would the observation of a flying disc be represented in the context of a magical ceremony to have any characteristic of Phoenician religion? We are told, for instance, the Phoenicians held the same view as the Hebrews concerning the soul. Representations of the flying discs in religion do not stop with the Phoenicians, and then he kind of goes on to this. We're going to scorpion men, and Japanese researcher Matsumura says, how does the Lord guide his angel if the angel cannot see the face of the Lord? An angel has a problem on the upper part of his eyes where the sacred cloud rests. He has also a thing to receive sounds on his head. This thing makes noises as the angel receives the order where it comes from his Lord. What is that so strange? He can look in the mirror. Interesting. Yeah, so we see this relation between the UFO phenomenon and the fallen angels. I just wanted to kind of call that out because now we're going to get into this Gnostic Big Bang and the alien in the fall of Lucifer. So the fall of Satan is portrayed by John Milton, resonates with the manuscript author, linking the fallen morning star to Cthulhu. And most importantly, the nature of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and Satan telling a story of the fall of the rebel angels after the war in heaven, which can only thank John Milton for his partially correct recovery of these texts from his dreaming in the Akashic record. So note how the manuscript often uses the sound waves of a ringing bell. Again, works on forensics, the signal transmission, an alien signal transmission, right? So the concept here is spooky when we think of Lovecraft's Call of Cthulhu, right? Because in Call of Cthulhu, Cthulhu Dead Dreaming is also publishing, he's pushing his thoughts into the fleshy minds of mammals, right? So, for example, Cthulhu in Lovecraft's lore, we're dead Cthulhu dreaming, right? So we have this with the juxtaposition with Nietzsche. So it says here, the manuscript author brings into proximity intimations of Cthulhu juxtaposed with Nietzsche, equating the non-Euclidean nature of Cthulhu with the madness of Nietzsche, right? So this, I think, was where we're at the Tower of Babel now, right? It is only now that I realize the disservice Nietzsche has done to helping mankind in his voyage to discover what lies beyond. For although Nietzsche's insights into morality and evil are quite appropriate to the theater of human society, he glosses over the fact that an inhuman evil, a horrific madness, does exist. I offer two pieces of proof or evidence. So this is where the Tower of Babel allegory comes in, where the idea, what is disturbing about the Kathu Journals is the way in which the manuscript author somehow implicates Cthulhu as he who visited madness upon Nietzsche, as opposed to the traditional role of God as he who prevented the building of the Tower of Babel. So it is here we find the disturbing quality of the morality of the manuscript author almost aesthetically denies God by replacing Cthulhu as he who punishes for the transgression of knowledge of the beyond. Again, we find ourselves, well, it's also interesting to think of in the Call of Cthulhu, right? And I just thinking of, if we go to Lovecraft, the Call of Cthulhu does have that idea of Cthulhu is sort of transmitting, right? He's transmitting out from the bottom of the ocean, right? I think I put out here on the, to assist us, 2 other books. I had this Necronomicon file, The Truth Behind the Legend. This is a great debunker's book, right? This is a great book of debunking, right? But it says this one thing I wanted to say is like, go to alternate sources. Get back to the original sources. So one thing about the original source, all right? And this might go back to Brian Murarescu's The Immortality Key, right? Get back to, you can always follow the rumor as far as you can. Necronomicon rumors have a tendency to become entangled with both fact and fiction. I am always surprised by people who pontificate on what Lovecraft said about the Necronomicon, and then they admit they never read his stories. Also, go to other sources. Does Lovecraft say that John Dee translated the Necronomicon? Start looking at biographies of John Dee. Description of his library and so forth. Too many people have placed their trust on a single source. Break the rumor into smaller parts. Just because John Dee was a real person doesn't mean he translated the Necronomicon. Even if you find out one part is false, it often helps you to do more research to bolster your argument. Well, I bring this up here not to call out false Necronomicons, but to call out the idea of how most of the spell of writing, right? And this is where we talk about this in the necromancy of Nyarlathotep, which is later. There's a connection between the magic spell and the idea of spelling. You know, we had that classic of writing is the invention of forgetting. But the idea of the spell also has with it the idea of preserving the thoughts of the dead, right? So we have letters to HP Lovecraft from August Derleth, letters to August Derleth from HP Lovecraft, right? We have, in a way, when we open this book with this Phoenician writing that we have, this technology of writing we have, we can go back and just find a letter to August Derleth from H.P. Lovecraft from 1929, where he says, "Good luck on all your stories. Your musical tale surely takes this is Lovecraft writing, takes the prize for extensive revision, and only one of mine comparable with that respect are the pictures in the house in the nameless city. I shall look for weird specimens now and then." So he's talking about their revisions. Your new paragraph of aesthetic reminiscence appeals to me with a special strength, since you know I'm an enthusiast about ancient houses and streets and the innumerable signs and symbols of generation-long continuous habitation which linger in the soul of an old town. I have no use for a modern city with garish, atmosphereless new buildings and broad, unimaginative, gridiron-ranged streets. A town is a real town to me only if it houses with histories, house that appeal to one's retrospective fancy and sense of pageantry. I must too have narrow curving hill streets and frequent little courts with grassy patches, moss-crusted bank walls. Occasional former farm buildings tell mutely of the countryside that used to be 200 years ago, right? So he's talking about pre-revolutionary houses in Salem, and I can point you out to ancient peak dwellings dating from the middle 1600s, now going on 300 years old. So the idea here of reanimating, so to speak, through the writing is part of what we're talking about here. And with falling the sound wave and signal, the transmission for beyond, the alien search begins here on Earth, since Milton places Dagon among the fallen angels of Paradise Lost. So this is Milton saying, in his own temple on the Garnal edge, where he fell flat and shamed his worshippers, Dagon his name, sea monster, upward man and downward fish, yet had his temple high. So a study of signals, stars, constellations for the possible origins of all these Cthulhu myths or dreams that Lovecraft explored. And I think we'll probably leave it at that. Coming up next is on the Council of Nicaea, of Dagon, Dagon in the Bible, Dagon in occult literature, the Ark of the Covenant, and Atlantis. So we'll get to those next time. So hopefully this has been interesting to everyone. If you're interested at all in the Kathu Journals, go check out our omnibus edition. You can check it in the links of our bookstore. We've also got the Genealogy of Cthulhu on our Patreon. You can read this for free, for as little as $1 in digital form. You can also pick it up in the bookstore. And we're also announcing our new Alchemy and Anthroposophy in the Dune Saga. This is a collection of some of our podcasts from here on Dune, but it's also collecting the Jungian and anthroposophy connections in Herbert's writings. We've got Water of Life in the Jungian Alchemy, Origins of Bene Gesserit, Frank Herbert on JFK and Nixon, The Ethics of God Emperor of Dune, Dune Revenant as Internet History, Psychoanalysis of God Emperor of Dune, and also the works of Samuel Butler, Instinct as Memory, Philosophy of Instinct and Memory on Cycles. Samuel Butler inspired Frank Herbert in both the Bene Gesserit, Bene Tlilax, and the Ixians all at once. So they have thinking machines, we have other memories that are genetic, and all of this is sort of explored in both a Jungian and an anthroposophy sense in this volume. So go check it out. Helps to support the channel, as do liking and subscribing. Thank you guys for listening this long. And if you made it this far, much appreciated listening. We will go into a part 3 soon enough. You can go check out our Patreon to see the release schedule. And take care, everyone. Bye-bye.